The night sky over Westhaven turned black in the middle of twilight, and a rare eclipse covered the sun like a living wound. The town lights flickered one by one, and the streets grew still under a cold, silver shadow. People stood at their windows with fear in their eyes, because old stories said that when this eclipse appeared, buried power would wake and hidden war would begin. Veyra stood on the hill above town, alone, with her dark black hair tied back and her plain travel cloak pulled tight against the wind. She was a young woman with a careful face, steady eyes, and a life that had never given her much peace. She worked as a courier for the Border Watch, and she wanted only one simple thing: a safe life for her younger brother, Finn, who waited for her at home. But that night, she felt a pull in her chest like a deep drum, and she knew the world was changing around her. The danger was not only the eclipse. Far beyond Westhaven, the Iron Empire was marching with a giant mech army that could turn fire, ice, lightning, and void energy into weapons. Their leader, Emperor Victor, wanted to make the eclipse permanent, because endless shadow would let his machines drain power from every land without limit. If he won, whole cities would fall silent and every border town would become a cage. That was why the night mattered, and that was why Veyra mattered, even before she understood it herself. Captain Wren arrived first, riding hard from the East Road on a dust-covered horse. He was a broad man with brown hair, a scarred coat, and the tired posture of someone who had seen too many battles. He served the border guard, and he wanted to hold the line long enough for the towns to evacuate. He looked at Veyra with surprise, because she was standing too close to the old Eclipse stone at the top of the hill, the stone that everyone had been told never to touch. Beside Wren came Myra, a young woman with red hair and a healer bag at her side, and she wanted to protect the wounded if the night turned bad. Myra also watched Veyra closely, because she had heard the old warnings about forbidden soul bonds, and she feared what would happen if one awakened during the eclipse. The first mech tower rose from the dark horizon before midnight, and its metal frame shone under the broken light of the sky. Then came another and another, until the land seemed crowded by giant moving shadows. Their heads turned as one, and blue beams swept across the fields. The first strike hit the farmlands outside Westhaven, where the machines gathered heat from the soil and turned it into a blazing blast that burned through fence lines and shattered stone walls. Wren shouted for the guards to retreat the villagers. Myra began treating the frightened and the shaken. Veyra tried to run toward town, but the Eclipse stone answered her fear with a deep vibration, and the ground beneath her boots bowed inward. That was when the forbidden bond opened. A ring of dark light spread from Veyra like a silent shockwave, and every loose stone around her lifted into the air. Her heart slammed against her ribs, and she felt the whole battlefield inside her mind, as if every object had weight, shape, and direction that she could touch. The nearest mech stumbled as if the land itself had grabbed its feet. The next machine lurched sideways, metal legs grinding against the earth. Veyra gasped, because she was not only pushing force outward. She was hearing the secret pull of the world, and the power felt ancient, dangerous, and far too large for her body. Wren stared at her in disbelief, then in hope. Myra stepped back, frightened but still calm, and said the words that changed everything. She explained that the Eclipse stone was not a curse by itself, it was a seal. Long ago, the first border mages used the stone to hide a gravity soul bond, because that bond could bend battlefields, break machine cores, and seal tears in the sky. But the power came with a price. Every major surge tore at the spirit of the user, and if the bond was forced too far, the user could collapse from within. Veyra had never heard this truth before, and the shock of it made her knees weaken. Before she could ask more, a mech commander with a black cloak moved into view on a ridge of broken rock. His name was Vance, and he served Emperor Victor with cold pride. Vance was a man with pale hair, sharp eyes, and a voice that carried across the field like a command blade. He wanted the same thing Victor wanted: control over all elemental sources, because he believed the continent was weak when it was free. He ordered his machines forward, and the army responded at once. Fire units stepped through the fields, ice units sealed the roads, lightning units cracked the air, and void units dimmed the light around them. Their weapons were not natural. They were built to harvest magic from living ground and crush any city that resisted. Veyra tried to use her new power again, and the battlefield bent in a wide circle around her. A line of mech soldiers lifted off their feet, then slammed back down hard enough to crack the road. But the surge hit her spirit like a hammer. Her vision blurred, her breath caught, and she nearly fell. Myra grabbed her arm and shouted that she had to stop forcing it. Ren ordered the guards to create space because if Veyra lost control, the whole hill could collapse. In that moment, Veyra understood the cost. Her power could save many people, but each use could also tear apart the last strength inside her. They retreated into an old relay hall beneath Westhaven, a stone place built from the bones of an older war. There, Veyra showed Veyra scrolls left by border mages who had fought the Iron Empire before. The scrolls told of 4 elemental paths that could support a gravity soul bond. Fire gave force and speed, ice gave control and stillness, lightning gave reach and timing. Void gave silence and the ability to cut through machine shields. To reach the core of the invading army, Veyra would need all 4, not as separate tricks, but as one balanced flow. She listened with growing fear because the task sounded impossible, yet she also felt a small spark of hope for the first time that night. The next attack came before dawn. Vance sent a fire mech into the lower streets, where its arm blades burst with heat and shattered carts, doors, and watch posts. Ren rushed to lead the defense, and Veyra pulled the wounded into the relay hall. Veyra followed the sound of chaos and saw children trapped near the market square. The mech lifted a burning arm to strike, and Veyra acted without thinking. She planted both feet, focused on the pull in the air, and forced the weight of the whole square to tilt away from the children. The machine missed, slammed into a stone arch, and staggered back. Then Veyra called a hard shield of ice from the river mist, a burst of frost that slowed the mech long enough for Ren to strike its core casing with a heavy spear. The machine did not fall forever, but it withdrew, damaged and driven back. That victory came with a hard lesson. Veyra shook so badly that she could barely stand. Veyra said her spirit was thinning with every full surge, and if she kept fighting without control, she would burn herself out from the inside. Veyra wanted to help more, yet fear made her hands tremble. Then Finn arrived at the relay hall, having followed the evacuation trail with a brave face and a bundle of food for his sister. He was a small boy with black hair and wide eyes, and he told Veyra that the town believed in her now. His simple trust gave her a reason to keep going, and it reminded her what was truly at stake. This was not about glory. It was about home. Under Veyra and Ren, Veyra trained through the long night. She learned to move small stones before large ones. She learned to slow falling debris instead of throwing it. She learned that fire did not have to destroy because it could also give a burst of lift. She learned that ice could hold a broken bridge steady. She learned that lightning could open a path through moving metal, and that void could silence the power lines inside a mech for just one breath. The training was hard and her spirit hurt after each step, but she kept going because the Empire was closing in from every side. Above them, the eclipse deepened, and the sky grew darker than it had any right to be. Then came the twist that changed the fight. Veyra uncovered the final scroll hidden in the relay hall wall, and the seal was marked with the crest of the Iron Empire itself. The truth struck them all at once. Emperor Victor had not only learned of the gravity soul bond, he had helped bury it long ago because he once feared its power, then later tried to copy it. When he failed, he built his mech army to steal elemental force from the land instead. He had also planted false stories that said the Eclipse stone was dangerous to keep the border mages away from it. The old warnings were not lies, but they had been twisted. Victor did not want the Eclipse to end. He wanted to lock the world in shadow, where his machines could rule without resistance. Veyra felt anger rise in her chest, sharp and clean, and for the first time she did not hide from it. She asked Ren and Veyra to help her reach the main tower, where the core engine of the army was said to wait beneath the old mountain road. Ren agreed at once because he had seen enough destruction to know that waiting would only make things worse. Veyra agreed too, because her fear had become resolve. Finn begged to come, but Veyra held him close and promised she would return. She was still afraid of her own power, yet now she understood it was not a curse meant to end her. It was a burden meant to be carried with care. The journey toward the mountain began with smoke on the horizon and metal footsteps in the distance, and the eclipse still hung overhead like a closed eye. Veyra walked beside Ren and Veyra through broken fields with the weight of the whole border on her shoulders. Somewhere ahead, Victor was waiting inside his fortress of steel, and somewhere deep under that fortress, the machine heart of the Empire was feeding on elemental energy. Veyra looked up at the dark sky, felt the pull inside her spirit, and took one careful breath. She was not ready to win yet, but she was no longer running, and the first gate of the mountain had already started to open. The night over the border was cold, heavy, and still, while broken fields stretched toward a mountain that looked like a closed fist. Dark clouds hung low above the land, and old watchfires flickered in the distance like weak sparks that refused to go out. Veyra walked at the front with her black hair tied back tight, her gray eyes fixed ahead, and her dark travel cloak moving in the wind. Captain Wren stayed on her left, broad-shouldered and steady, his weathered face hard with purpose, while Myra kept close on the right, her red braid tucked over one shoulder and her healer's satchel bouncing softly at her side. The three of them were not just crossing land anymore. They were walking into the heart of a fight that could decide the border, because Emperor Victor had sealed himself inside his fortress of steel, and his hidden machine core was draining elemental power from the ground, the stone, and the sky. If that machine kept feeding, the Empire would grow stronger, the border would weaken, and every village between here and the wall would slowly lose the strength that kept it alive. Veyra knew that truth, and it pressed on her like armor made of stone. She had heard it from scouts, from border guards, and from the fear in the voices of people who had already lost their farms to empty soil. Wren wanted to stop Victor before the fortress reached full power, because he had spent his life guarding the line between freedom and control. Myra wanted to keep the group moving, because she knew a wounded land could still heal if someone reached the source of the wound in time. Veyra wanted something deeper and harder to name. She wanted to understand why the power kept pulling at her spirit whenever the mountain came into view. It was not just fear. It was a call like the land itself had noticed her and was asking her to answer. Ahead of them, the first gate of the mountain had started to open, and none of them knew yet if it was a path, a trap, or a warning. They reached the gate at dawn when the sky was pale and the last dark stars were fading. The opening was not a normal door or archway. It was a giant ring of ancient stone set into the mountainside, and its cracked surface held thin silver veins that glowed in quiet pulses. The shape was rough and old, like something made before any empire had a name, and it hummed with a deep force that Veyra could feel in her ribs. Wren stopped at once and raised his hand, because he knew a dangerous thing when he saw one. Myra stepped closer, her soft green eyes wide, and she said the air felt warm even though the morning was cold. Veyra moved forward until her gloved hand hovered near the stone, and the humming grew stronger, as if the ring recognized her. Then the ground shivered and a hidden seam split the mountain wall beside it. Dust slid down in thin lines, and a narrow passage appeared behind loose rock and old brickwork, leading down into darkness. Inside that hidden way was the Border Relay Hall, an old underground chamber that seemed forgotten by every ruler who had ever claimed the land. Worn pillars held up a low ceiling, cracked floor tiles spread under their feet, and dim lantern light revealed wall panels buried behind loose bricks. The hall smelled like dust, wet stone, and old metal. Wren said the place must have been built to carry messages and power across the border long before Victor turned the land into a machine. Myra found carved marks on the walls and guessed they were warnings left by people who had seen this system fail once before. Veyra listened, but she kept looking at the stone ring behind them because the glow in its cracks had begun to match the pulse in her chest. Then they found the first clear message. It was not written in words alone. It was a row of symbols and simple carved lines showing the mountain gate, the fortress above it, and a deep chamber below marked as the machine heart. Under that, one plain sentence had been cut into the stone: only the one the land calls may open the path below. Wren frowned at that message because he did not like riddles and he liked traps even less. Myra looked at Veyra because she understood what the words meant even before anyone said them aloud. Veyra was not just a fighter who had ended up in the wrong war. She was part of the reason the mountain gate was opening, and Victor had likely known it for a long time. That was the first real twist, and it changed everything in one breath. Victor had not been chasing Veyra only to capture a border rebel. He had been hunting her because her spirit could unlock the old path beneath the mountain, and the machine core in his fortress could not reach full strength without whatever power waited there. This made the danger much larger, because if Victor found the hidden route first, he could drain the old source completely and turn the Empire into a cage that no border army could break. Veyra felt anger rise in her, but she also felt fear, because now her own power was tied to a plan she had never asked to be part of. Before anyone could speak, a hard metal echo rolled through the hall and the lantern flames shook. Far above them, steel footsteps thundered across the mountain path. Captain Wren moved at once, spear in hand, and he placed himself between the passage and the open hall. Myra backed toward the wall panels and pulled small cloth wraps from her satchel, ready to bind wounds if she had to. Veyra stood still and listened as the sound came closer, because she knew that sound. It was the heavy, sharp rhythm of the Iron Empire mech army, towering steel war machines with jointed limbs, glowing elemental cores, and armor plates that clicked with every step. A cold voice followed the footsteps, calm and sharp, and it belonged to Vance, the pale-haired commander with a black mech cloak and a dark command gauntlet. He was not Victor, but he served Victor with perfect discipline, and he believed order was worth any cost. Vance wanted the mountain gate because he believed the Empire could save the land by controlling it completely, even if every village had to kneel first. His motive was simple and frightening because he truly thought mercy was weakness. The hall walls trembled as the first machine shadow passed outside, and then Vance gave a quiet order for his scouts to search below. Ren signaled for silence, and the three of them moved deeper into the hall through a side corridor hidden behind broken stone panels. The passage led them to a lower room where the floor dropped in steps toward a sealed door made of old iron and white stone. In the center of that room stood another marker like the first, but this one was larger, cleaner, and stronger. Its dark surface held more silver veins, and its ring shape was complete. This was the Eclipse stone, an ancient marker that seemed less like a rock and more like a sleeping tool made by someone who knew the land very well. The moment Veyra looked at it, the pull in her spirit became almost painful, but not in a bad way. It felt like memory without words. Myra whispered that the stone must be linked to the mountain gate and the machine core because the hall was built to connect them. Ren knelt near the floor and found pressure marks from old machinery, proof that Victor had already used this route before, or at least had tried to force it open. That meant the Empire was not searching blindly anymore. It had history here, and that history could help it strike harder than anyone expected. Veyra touched the Eclipse stone and the room changed. The silver veins lit up one by one, and an image formed across the stone floor in lines of light. It showed the mountain, the fortress above, and a deep chamber below where rotating metal rings circled a sealed heart of power. It also showed a smaller shape moving between them, and at first Veyra thought it was herself. Then the image shifted and the figure became a child. The room went silent. Ren stepped forward at once because he saw it too. Myra covered her mouth with one hand. The child in the image had black hair, a small frame, and a simple village shirt, and the shape matched the boy called Finn, the little messenger who had vanished from the border road 2 nights earlier. Finn was not just lost, he had been taken or guided or hidden on purpose, and the stone was showing him as part of the path below. That was the second revelation, and it made the danger feel close and personal. Victor was using the hidden roots to gather more than power. He was using people. Veyra realized then that the Empire had not only attacked land, it had started turning lives into keys. A sudden of metal cut through the chamber, and the sealed door at the far side groaned under force from the other side. The Iron Empire had found the hall. Vance had not come alone this time. The mech army was outside, and one of the towering machines had begun to hammer at the mountain gate above. Dust fell in sheets from the ceiling, and the Eclipse stone answered with a bright pulse that lit every crack in the room. Ren grabbed Veyra by the shoulder and told her they had seconds, not minutes. Myra rushed to the wall panels and used her tools to pry open an ancient latch because she had noticed a hidden system beneath the old relay design. Behind it was a narrow shaft leading even lower, straight toward the machine heart. The stone was not only showing a path, it was offering the only way forward. Veyra looked at the opening, then at Ren, then at Myra, and for the first time she did not feel like a person being dragged by fate. She felt like someone choosing a road, even if the road led into darkness. Ren covered the rear, his spear braced as the door buckled under the pressure from beyond. Myra held the Eclipse stone steady with both hands, and her green eyes stayed fixed on Veyra with fierce trust. She did not have the strength of a soldier, but she had the courage of someone who had chosen to help anyway. Veyra stepped into the narrow shaft, and the pull in her spirit turned into a clear direction at last. She understood that Victor wanted to control the land by draining its power, Vance wanted to enforce that control through machines, and Finn had become part of the path because the Empire was already moving pieces into place. She also understood something about herself. She was not only reacting anymore, she was becoming the person who could stand in the middle of a broken border and still keep walking. Below her, the shaft opened into deeper dark, and somewhere far beneath the mountain, the machine core continued to hum like a giant heart made of steel. Veyra took one breath, then another, and moved down into the shadows as the first true descent began. The The shaft under the mountain was cold, narrow, and full of old stone dust, and Veyra moved through it with careful steps that never quite slowed her heartbeat. The air tasted like iron and damp rock, while the sound of the machine core below kept rising through the dark like a distant drum that would not stop. She knew the Empire was already deep inside the mountain because no hidden place stayed quiet once Victor wanted it. That was the true danger now. The border was no longer facing a future threat. The border was already inside the machine. Veyra kept her left hand on the wall, her black hair tied back and tight, her gray eyes fixed on the darkness ahead, and she thought of the towns above that would not survive if this core woke fully. She was not only going down to stop a weapon, she was going down to stop a whole way of life from being crushed under steel. Behind her, far above in the shaft, Captain Wren was still holding the upper passage with his spear ready, his brown hair damp with sweat, his scarred face hard with focus, and his heavy boots planted like a stone wall. He had sent her ahead because he trusted her judgment, and because he knew a border guard could hold a line, but only someone like Veyra could read the shape of a trap before it closed. At the next landing, Veyra found the first sign that this was not an empty tunnel but a working piece of the Empire. Old wall panels had been torn open, and fresh metal lines had been fitted into the stone. A low blue light moved through those lines like water inside glass. She touched one panel and felt a faint pulse under her glove, as if the mountain itself had been turned into a machine. Then she heard a voice ahead, soft and steady, and she turned to see Myra crouched beside a broken support beam. Myra had red hair in a low braid, soft green eyes, and the careful hands of a healer who had spent her life saving people instead of fighting. Her layered field outfit was marked with pale blue cloth wraps, and her satchel was heavy with bandages, herbs, and small tools. She had come down through a side route with Finn because if the shaft collapsed, the injured would need her, and if the Empire found the child, she wanted to be there first. Finn stood near her, a small boy with black hair, a simple village shirt, and short travel pants that looked too thin for this cold place. He held his cloth bundle tight against his chest as if it contained the last safe thing in his world. He was brave in the quiet way children sometimes are because he had already seen too much and still refused to let fear decide for him. Myra looked up at Veyra and whispered that the walls were carrying power from below, not just storing it. The Empire was feeding the whole mountain into the core through hidden relay channels. That meant the deeper they went, the stronger the system would become, unless someone cut the flow. Veyra understood then why Victor had chosen this place. He did not want a border fortress. He wanted a heart he could command and a body of steel that would answer him. They moved together through the relay corridor, and every step showed how carefully the Empire had prepared. Broken pillars had been replaced with fresh braces, ancient tiles had been cut open for cable bundles, and narrow slots in the walls let thin beams of light sweep across the floor like watchful eyes. Veyra guided them past each one because she could see patterns now in a way she never had before. She was learning to think like the people hunting her. That knowledge was frightening, but it also gave her power. At the end of the corridor, they found the border relay hall, the old underground chamber where the border once sent warnings across the mountain chain. It was a wide stone room with archways, worn pillars, cracked floor tiles, and lanterns that burned low behind dusty glass. Behind loose bricks on the far wall, hidden panels still carried the original map of the border lines, but now those panels were partly covered by Imperial steel. Someone had used the hall as both a command room and a prison. Along one wall sat a row of empty restraint rings. On another wall, a lowered screen flickered with mechanical symbols and location marks. Myra crossed the room first, careful and alert, while Finn stared at the empty rings and asked in a small voice who had been held there. No one answered at first because the truth was clear. This was where the Empire had tested people, measured fear, and learned how much pressure the old systems could carry before they broke. Then a new sound rolled through the hall, a deep metallic step that shook dust from the ceiling. A door at the far end opened with a grinding sigh, and a line of Iron Empire mech soldiers stood in the doorway. Towering steel machines with jointed limbs, glowing cores, and sharp armor plates that caught the lantern light in hard flashes. Their power channels glowed with fire, ice, lightning, and a dark void shimmer. They did not rush. They advanced in perfect order because someone had told them exactly where to go. Veyra took one sharp breath and moved before fear could pin her down. She pulled her blade free, but she did not charge alone. Captain Wren burst in from the side passage at the same moment, spear leveled, coat snapping behind him, and his voice rang through the hall as he told them to fall back to the map wall. Myra dragged Finn behind a pillar, and her hands were already pulling out bandages and herbs in case the hall turned into a long fight. The mech soldiers split into two lines and released a wave of force that slammed across the floor, forcing everyone to bend low. Veyra slid under a broken beam, struck one mech at the ankle joint, and felt the impact travel through her arms like a hammer. The machine staggered, but did not fall. Ren drove his spear into a seam at another mech side panel, then twisted hard and forced it to step back into the others. The hall filled with sparks, scraping metal, and sharp flashes of light, yet none of the violence was wild. It was all controlled, all deliberate, as if the Empire wanted to capture them more than destroy them. Then the room lights changed. The lantern glow dimmed and a new pale light came from the ceiling screen. A voice spoke from it, smooth and cold, and everyone froze when they heard Emperor Victor. He had silver hair, an angular face, pale eyes that never looked warm, and a black imperial robe with hard shoulder armor that made him seem carved from stone. His voice did not shout. It never needed to. He said the border had always been weak because people on the border protected one another instead of serving one ruler. He said the machine corps would solve that weakness forever. It would join the land, the roads, and the armies into one command. He said order was kinder than freedom because freedom let people resist while order made them useful. Veyra felt anger rise in her chest, but Victor was not finished. He said the old builders had hidden the core because they feared exactly this kind of power, and he had spent years finding the path to it. That was the motive of his war. He did not simply want land. He wanted a system that could never refuse him. The mech line moved again, but before the machines could close in, a second figure appeared on the upper walkway above the hall. Vance stepped into view like a blade made human, tall, lean, and sharp-featured, with pale hair, a black mech commander cloak, segmented armor plates, and a dark command gauntlet that glowed with control marks. He was not surprised to see them. He had expected them. His eyes moved over Veyra, Ren, Myra, and Finn like a general counting pieces on a board. Then he spoke with calm confidence and revealed the twist that changed the fight. He said the core was not just powering the mech army. It was holding back a deeper system lock, one built by the old border engineers to seal the mountain from the inside. If Victor forced the core open the wrong way, the border grid would collapse into a chain of broken routes, and every district connected to the relay would lose power, warning lines, and shield control at once. That meant Victor was willing to crush the border to seize it, but Vance added something worse. He said the old engineers had made the core respond to memory as well as command. It listened not only to force but to the people who first kept it alive. Veyra stared at him, and in that moment she understood why her own name had kept drawing attention in hidden records. Her bloodline was tied to the relay builders. Her family had not simply lived near the border. They had helped build the system Victor now wanted to own. She had been chosen by accident and by history both. That revelation did not make her special in a proud way. It made her responsible. The machine beneath the mountain had recognized the right to answer her, and Victor had known more about her than he had ever said. The hall shook harder as the mech soldiers closed in, but the plan of the Empire had a weakness, and Veyra saw it before anyone else spoke. The core could respond to memory, which meant it could also respond to a broken command. The old builders had not made it for a tyrant. They had made it for a border that needed balance, warning, and trust. Veyra looked at Myra, who was holding Finn behind the pillar with one arm while watching the floor lights with sharp eyes. She looked at Ren, who was already bleeding through a torn sleeve but still standing straight. She looked at the empty restraints, the hidden maps, and the humming wall panels that carried power down into the deep. Then she made a choice that changed the shape of the room. She told Ren to hold the left side, Myra to keep Finn low and away from the sparks, and she ran toward the center screen instead of away from it. Vance shouted for the machines to stop her, but the command came too late. Veyra slammed her glove against the old control panel buried behind the Imperial overlay, and the entire hall answered with a violent surge of light. The mech soldiers froze for one single second, caught between Imperial command and ancient border memory. In that same breath, Veyra heard something beneath the floor, a second chamber opening deeper below, and the machine core hum changed into a louder, clearer pulse. It was not awake yet, but it was listening now. Veyra felt the mountain recognize her, and she knew the next descent would lead into the core itself. Above her, Victor had lost control of the room for the first time. Below her, the heart of steel had begun to turn. The way forward had opened, and the war was only getting closer. The underground hall had gone still, but it was not peaceful, and everyone in the chamber could feel that difference at once. Dust drifted through the lantern light above the cracked stone floor, while the eclipse stone gave off a thin silver glow that made every face look sharp and tense. Veyra stood near the open gap in the floor, her black hair tied back tight, her gray eyes fixed on the dark opening below. She was a young woman who had come here to stop the Iron Empire from using the hidden machine network against the border towns, and now she understood that the danger was larger than she first thought. Captain Wren, a broad man with brown hair, a scar across one cheek, and a border guard coat, stood behind her with his spear ready, because he had sworn to protect the border and the people who lived there. Myra, a young woman with red hair in a low braid and soft green eyes, kept close to Finn, the small black-haired boy who held his cloth bundle with both hands as if it was the only safe thing left in the world. They were not just trapped in an old hall anymore. They were standing above the sleeping heart of the Empire, and if that heart woke in the wrong hands, the border lands would be crushed under steel and fear. For one long second, no one moved, because everyone heard the same low pulse rising from below. It was deep, steady, and clear now, like a giant machine opening one eye in the dark. Veyra felt it in her boots, in her ribs, and in the air around her. The machine core was not fully awake, but it had heard her, and that made the moment more dangerous than any open battle. Above them, far through stone and metal, Emperor Victor was losing control of his own hidden system. Victor, a man with silver hair, cold, pale eyes, and a long black imperial robe, ruled through order and fear, and he had built the machine army so no border lord, no rebel, and no common town could stand against him. Yet Victor had never meant for the hidden chamber beneath the mountain to be found by outsiders, because the deeper core was older than his empire, and older power did not always obey a crown. That was why he had sent Vance, his tall, lean commander with pale hair and a black mech cloak, to force the chamber closed and bring the system back under imperial control. Vance wanted more than loyalty, though. He wanted to prove that he was the only one smart enough to command the army when Victor failed, and that hunger made him even more dangerous than the Emperor himself. Veyra reached for the edge of the broken floor and looked down into the second chamber that had just opened. A narrow shaft of light came up from below, and it showed a moving ring of metal far beneath the hall. The rings turned slowly, then faster, while thin blue lines lit up along the walls like veins waking under skin. She did not understand all the old machine rules yet, but she understood enough to know one simple truth. The core had a choice, and the choice was no longer fully Victor-esque. That was the twist hidden in the mountain, and it changed everything. The Empire had always spoken as if the mech army belonged to the Emperor alone, but the machine below had its own memory and its own lock. It had once been built to answer a bond, not just a command. Veyra had touched the Eclipse stone earlier, and that stone had reacted to her in a way no one expected. Now the core was reacting too, because the old system had recognized the same signal in her. She was not merely a trespasser. She was a key that someone long ago had hidden from the Empire. That truth made Captain Wren stare at her in shock, and it made Myra tighten her grip on Finn, because suddenly Veyra was not only the one leading them forward. She was also the one the mountain seemed to be waiting for. Before anyone could speak, a heavy boom shook the chamber, and stone dust fell from the ceiling in a slow gray curtain. Vance had arrived above them. His voice rang through a metal grate in the wall, calm and cold, and he ordered everyone to surrender the floor access and kneel before the Empire. Wren raised his spear at once, but Veyra saw the real threat behind Vance's words. He did not care about the border towns, and he did not care about Victor either, because all he wanted was control of the awakening core. Vance believed that if he claimed the deeper chamber, he could direct the mech army away from Victor and into his own hand. That would make him the strongest man in the Empire, and he had already decided that anyone in his way was just a tool to be moved aside. Myra stepped forward then, calm but pale, and told Veyra that the pulse below was growing faster. The machine was not only listening, it was reaching. Finn, trembling but brave, looked up at Veyra and asked if the mountain was alive. Veyra did not have an easy answer, so she told him the truth in simple words. The mountain was not alive like a person, but it remembered. It remembered who built it, who locked it, and who was meant to open it again. That memory gave her both hope and fear, because something that remembers can also decide to resist. Wren moved first when the wall grates began to slide open and the first Imperial drones started to push into the hall. They were not full mechs yet, but they were sharp metal walkers with glowing cores, and they came in a tight line like a hunting pack. Ren drove them back with his spear in clean, powerful strikes, using the narrow space to stop their advance. Myra pulled Finn behind a pillar and used her healer's satchel to wrap his shaking hands, because she knew fear could freeze a child faster than any winter wind. Veyra did not fight the drones head-on. She watched the floor, the silver veins in the Eclipse stone, and the growing pulse under the chamber. Then she made a hard choice. She stepped onto the cracked ring around the open shaft and held the stone marker steady with both hands, even as the machine hum rose around her. The silver lines answered her touch, and for a brief moment the whole chamber changed. The wall panels hidden behind loose bricks slid open, and old symbols lit up across the stone like a map waking after a long sleep. Veyra realized that the border relay hall had never been only a guard post. It was a bridge between the surface and the core, a place built to test who could be trusted before the deep power was released. That meant the people who buried it had feared the same thing Victor feared now. They had known that the core could help protect the border, but they had also known it could enslave it. That was why the chamber had been sealed for so long, and that was why the mountain had been waiting for someone with the right bond. Then the second chamber opened wider below them, and cold light spilled up through the crack in the floor. A long mechanical platform rose on hidden rails, carrying a central column of steel that turned slowly like a giant locked heart. Veyra looked down and saw symbols etched into the rings, matching the lines on the Eclipse stone. The core was not a simple engine. It was a command mind built into metal. It did not just move the mech army, it chose which signals to trust. That explained why Victor had kept the deepest level secret, and it explained why Vance had pushed so hard to reach it first. If Vance could change the command pattern, he could take the army away from Victor and use it to crush every border town that resisted him. Yet the core was already responding to Veyra, because the old bond did not care about titles. It cared about the right pattern, the right heart, and the right choice. Veyra felt that choice pressing down on her like a second gravity. She could try to shut the chamber and hide again, but that would leave Victor and Vance to tear the Empire apart above them. Or she could step deeper into the machine heart and risk waking something no one fully understood. Behind her, Ren shouted that the Imperial drones were regrouping. In front of her, the platform below shifted and the core called again, louder than before. Veyra drew in one slow breath, looked at Finn, Myra, and Ren, and understood that the next descent would not just reveal the engine. It would reveal who she was meant to become. She started toward the open chamber, while far above, Victor and Vance were already moving their own pieces for the coming war. The underground chamber opened like a wound in the stone, and cold air poured out around Veyra as she stepped forward. The walls of the border relay hall still shook from the pressure above, and dust drifted down through broken seams in the ceiling. Behind her, Captain Ren stood with his spear ready, brown hair damp with sweat, his scarred face tight with focus, while Myra held her satchel close, red hair tied in a low braid, her green eyes moving from wall to wall. Finn stayed near Myra, his small frame tense, black hair falling over his brow, his hands wrapped around a small cloth bundle as if it could keep him safe. All four of them understood the danger now. The Imperial drones were regrouping above, the floor was shifting below, and the machine core was calling to Veyra in a way none of them could explain. If they failed here, the Empire would keep its secret, the border would fall farther under Victor and Vance, and whatever slept in the deep chamber might be turned into a weapon against every town along the frontier. Veyra did not look back when she crossed the threshold. She was a young woman with black hair tied in a practical ponytail, gray eyes steady in the dim light, and a slim, athletic build that let her move fast even when fear pressed on her shoulders. Her dark travel cloak brushed the stone as she advanced, and her worn boots landed carefully on the broken floor. She had never wanted to be a leader, but the others had started to follow her because she could feel things before they happened, and because she never ran when the truth turned ugly. That was what drove her now. She wanted to know why the core had called her name in that strange, silent way, and she wanted to stop the Empire from using old power to crush the borderlands into obedience. She stepped down a narrow stair, and the chamber below opened wider than she expected, filled with rotating metal rings, glowing power lines, and a sealed central engine that hummed like a living heart. The machine core was not just a machine. It was an ancient engine buried inside layers of Imperial steel, and its sealed center had been feeding the Iron Empire mech army for years. Towering war machines moved somewhere above and beyond the hall, their jointed limbs carrying fire, ice, lightning, and void energy through their power channels, all of it linked to this hidden source below. Veyra saw that the core was not built by the Empire alone. Old stone rings surrounded it, and the cracked lines in the floor matched the same silver glow in the core itself. That meant the Empire had found something older than its own rule, then forced it into service. Ren came to the stair behind her and hissed that the drones were closing in from the upper halls. Myra checked the wall panels and found markings hidden behind loose bricks, marks that showed the relay hall had once been a watch station for sealing the chamber, not opening it. Finn noticed a small symbol near the base of the core, and his voice came out thin when he said that it matched the mark on the bundle he carried, a mark from his village, the one place he remembered before Imperial fire drove him out. That was the first clear twist, and it struck them all at once. Finn was not only a frightened boy who had been dragged into danger. He was connected to the old border keepers, and his cloth bundle held a broken key ring made of the same dark stone as the Eclipse stone above ground. Myra looked at the bundle, then at Veyra, and understood that the boy had been carrying the missing link without knowing it. The Empire had not just hunted the core, it had hunted the families that knew how to reach it. Victor had ordered those villages broken apart because the border keepers had once guarded the sealed engine and kept the mech army from waking too early. Vance, standing at Victor's side in the upper command tower, wanted the core for a colder reason. He believed the Empire should control every border and every road, and he feared that if the core awakened freely, it might choose a ruler instead of obeying one. So his answer was simple and cruel. He planned to bind it first, then use it to make the borderlands bend forever. As that truth sank in, the chamber changed around them. The core gave another low call, and the metal rings began to turn a little faster. Lights raced through the floor lines in sharp silver paths, then dimmed, then flared again. Ren lifted his spear and stepped in front of Myra and Finn because he understood one thing better than anyone else in the hall. A border guard did not need perfect answers to do the right thing. He only needed to stand where the danger was greatest. Ren had served the Empire for years, and his weathered face and long scar had taught him how quickly power could become cruelty. He now wanted only one thing: to keep the people under his watch alive long enough to choose their own future. He barked orders to move back to the side wall where the stone looked strongest, and Myra worked at once, pressing healing cloth into a crack where the floor had already begun to split. Her job was not only to mend wounds. She wanted to keep the group together because she knew frightened people made bad choices when they felt alone. Finn, despite his shaking hands, opened the cloth bundle and found not just the key ring, but a tiny map etched into the lining, showing a second path deeper under the hall. Veyra took the broken key ring in both hands, and the moment she touched it, the Eclipse stone above seemed to answer. A quiet pulse moved through the chamber, and for one clear second she saw a memory that was not her own. She saw border keepers standing in a circle around this same core, their faces hidden, their hands joined, and the first warning they had left behind. The core could not be controlled by force alone. It reacted to intent, to trust, and to the bond between living people and the old promise beneath the border. That was why the Empire had never fully mastered it, and why Victor had become obsessed with finding a way to break its will. He needed the mech army to stay loyal, but he also feared the chamber might awaken something that would judge him unworthy. That fear had made him harsher, and it had pushed him to send Vance and the drones below to seize the core before anyone else could touch it. The revelation changed Veyra at once. She understood that the strange call had not been asking her to command the machine. It had been asking her to listen and to decide whether power should belong to fear or to care. But before she could answer that call, the first Imperial drones broke into the upper stairwell. Their metal feet struck stone with sharp clicks, and their glowing eyes flashed in the dust. Ren moved first, driving them back with the butt of his spear and forcing their front line to stumble into each other. The hall shook again, and a section of wall collapsed behind them, sealing one exit while opening a narrow crack to the side. Myra shouted for Finn to stay low as she threw a wrapped charm onto the floor, not magic in the grand sense, but a simple healer trick that released a bright burst of scent and smoke to blind the drones for a moment. Finn, trembling but focused, squeezed through the narrow crack and saw the second path on his map lead to an old control bridge below the core. He called back that the way down was still open, but only barely. Veyra moved toward the central engine because she now knew that the answer was not to flee. If the core could respond to trust, then someone had to reach it before Victor or Vance forced it into obedience. The chamber lights brightened, then cut low again, and the sealed center began to open one slow layer at a time. Far above, in a clean Imperial command room lit by pale steel lamps, Emperor Victor watched the border map with cold, pale eyes. He was a man with silver hair, an angular face, and a long black robe lined with hard shoulder armor and polished metal details. He hated disorder because it reminded him that his rule was not complete, and he wanted the borderlands quiet, mapped, and useful. Beside him stood Vance, tall and lean, with pale hair, sharp features, a black mech commander cloak, segmented armor plates, and a dark command gauntlet resting near the map table. Vance spoke with calm precision, saying the lower chamber was reacting more strongly than expected. Victor did not answer at once because he could already see the risk. If Veyra reached the core first, she might awaken the old bond that the Empire had tried to bury. If the bond returned, the mech army could stop obeying simple orders and begin following the deeper law of the chamber. That was the fear he never said out loud. It was not only that he might lose the war. It was that the war itself might prove he had never had true control. So he gave Vance a final order: send the heavier units, seal the chamber exits, and take the girl alive if possible. Victor wanted answers and Vance wanted command, and both of them were now racing toward the same sealed truth. Back below, the chamber opened wider with a deep metallic groan, and a cold ring of light climbed over Veyra's face. She lifted the broken key ring toward the core, and the silver veins inside the dark stone began to glow in answer. Ren saw it and understood that the moment had changed. This was not just a machine room anymore. It was a trial. He planted his boots, turned his shoulder toward the drones, and told Myra and Finn to stay with Veyra no matter what happened next. Myra nodded, even though fear was still in her eyes, because she trusted Veyra more than she trusted the Empire, and that was enough for now. Finn tightened his grip on the bundle and stepped closer, because he had finally learned that the mark from his village had not been a burden. It was a piece of a larger promise. Veyra took one more breath, felt the core pull at her with a force that was half warning and half welcome, and reached toward the opening seal. Behind her, the drones closed in. Above her, Victor moved his army, and somewhere inside the deep chamber, something ancient began to wake. The old chamber shook with a low and steady rumble, and dust drifted down from the cracked stone ceiling as the seal began to move. Deep below the border relay hall, the air felt cold, heavy, and old, like it had been waiting for a long time to wake up and breathe again. Veyra stood with her black hair tied tight in a practical ponytail, her gray eyes fixed on the opening seam, and her dark travel cloak hanging close around her slim frame. She had no time to wonder if she was ready, because the truth was simple and sharp. If the seal opened wrong, the machine core would surge out of control, the Iron Empire would seize its power, and every person in the underground routes would be trapped inside Victor's growing war. Behind her, Captain Ren planted his heavy boots on the cracked floor, his brown hair damp with sweat, his broad body tense, and the scar across his cheek bright under the lantern light. He carried his spear with both hands and watched the chamber like a man who knew that one mistake could cost many lives. Myra stood near him, her red braid resting over her healer wraps, her soft green eyes moving from Veyra to Finn and back again, because she knew that courage mattered, but so did keeping everyone alive enough to use it. Finn was only a small boy, but he stepped closer with his bundle held tight against his chest, his black hair falling over worried eyes, and his simple village shirt marked by the strange symbol that had once made him feel cursed. Now he understood that the mark was not shame. It was a promise, left behind by people who had trusted the future would need him. That was why he did not run when the chamber groaned again. That was why he looked at Veyra and nodded. He was ready to help, even if he still feared what the promise might ask of him. Above them, the Iron Empire pressed harder into the underground system, and Victor did not move with rage alone. He moved with a cold and careful plan, because he believed every hidden power should belong to the Empire, and every seal should be broken only after he controlled what was inside. Emperor Victor stood in his long black robe on a high bridge inside the command route, his silver hair neat, his pale eyes calm, and his hard shoulder armor shining under the pale engine glow. To him, the machine core was not a wonder. It was a weapon, a source of endless force that could feed his mech army, crush the border towns, and end every rebel path in one stroke. Beside him, Vance waited like a sharp shadow made human, his pale hair slicked back, his tall, lean body wrapped in a black mech commander cloak, and his dark command gauntlet resting at his side. Vance cared less about Empire pride and more about proving he was the one who could finish what others could not. He wanted the command, the glory, and the chance to stand above all rival officers. When the drones sent their first report that the seal was opening, Victor only narrowed his eyes and gave a small nod. He wanted the core intact, and he wanted the people below alive only long enough to lead him to it. That was the true danger, because Victor was not trying to destroy the chamber. He was trying to own it, and ownership in his hands meant chains for everyone else. As the mech army moved, their steel limbs clanged through the tunnels, and their elemental cores flashed with fire, ice, lightning, and void light. The sound rolled toward the chamber like a storm made of iron. Veyra felt the pull of the core grow stronger, and for one breath she thought it might tear her mind apart. The opening seal stretched wider, and the thin silver veins in the Eclipse stone glowed brighter, answering something deep inside the chamber. She had seen enough strange things to know this was not just a machine waiting in the dark. It was alive in the old sense, bound by rules that were older than the Empire and older than the Border War. The stone did not only power the core. It also judged who could approach it without breaking the balance. That was why the hidden promise mattered, and that was why Finn's mark had changed everything. The mark was one part of a larger pattern, a human key that matched the stone's ancient circuit. Finn did not fully understand it yet, but the core did. When he stepped closer, the silver veins flickered in a slow and careful rhythm, and the air around him grew warmer. Myra saw it first, and her healer face changed from worry to shock. She grabbed Finn by the shoulder and whispered that he must stay calm, because the chamber was reading him like a lock reads a key. Veyra glanced at him, then at the stone, and the truth landed in her mind with sudden force. The village mark had never been a curse made by bad luck. It had been placed there by people who knew this day would come. They had hidden the pattern in plain sight because Victor was always hunting for power, and if he had found the key early, he would have forced the core open and ripped the system apart. Now the core stirred in answer to Finn, and Veyra knew she had to trust the boy she had once thought needed protection more than purpose. Then the chamber changed again, and the ground gave a deeper shudder as if something below the floor had turned over in sleep. A ring of light spread across the stone panels, and old wall sections shifted apart with a rough grinding sound. From those panels came a buried chamber map, half worn away, showing the border relay hall as part of a much larger network that spread under the Empire like roots. Veyra read the marks fast, and she understood the second truth hidden inside the first. The machine core was not just feeding the mech army. It was also holding back a deeper surge from the underground network, a flood of power that could erase every tunnel if the seal failed all at once. That meant Victor was not only racing for strength, he was racing against a disaster he did not even care to understand. Ren saw the change in her face and knew it was bad news before she spoke. He moved beside her, ready to fight, but Veyra raised one hand and told him the core could be opened safely only if the promise was completed. Finn had to stand at the center of the ring, and Veyra had to guide the pull through the Eclipse stone without letting the chamber collapse into uncontrolled force. That was when the first drone dropped through a broken archway and hit the floor with a harsh metallic scrape. More followed behind it, their lenses burning red in the dim light and their sharp metal arms unfolding as they locked onto the group. Ren lunged forward and drove them back with controlled force, his spear moving in wide, hard arcs. Myra pulled Finn behind a cracked pillar and pressed her hands over the bundle at his chest, keeping him calm while she watched the chamber entrance. Veyra stepped toward the stone ring, feeling the core call to her more clearly now, and she knew the next few moments would decide whether the underground world awakened as a refuge or became a prison. Above the chamber, Victor gave the order to advance, and the mech army answered with iron steps and glowing cores. Vance moved first through the tunnel split, his command gauntlet flashing as he sent a wave of pressure through the front line, forcing the smaller drones ahead like a spear point. He wanted the opening seal before anyone else could understand it, because he knew Victor would reward the one who delivered the prize. That greed made him dangerous, but it also made him careless. A team of border scouts and hidden workers, led by Captain Ren earlier in the route, had already weakened the side passages with careful cuts and loose supports. When the first heavy mech tried to push through, the tunnel wall cracked wide and dropped a curtain of stone and dust between the front unit and the rest of the force. It did not destroy the army, but it slowed them just enough to matter. Ren heard the distant collapse and grinned once, hard and tired, because every second bought below was a second earned with bloodless grit and stubborn hands. Veyra did not look up. She could feel the core now, and it felt less like an object and more like a sleeping giant listening to her breath. She placed her gloved hand near the Eclipse stone, and the silver veins lit in response. Finn stepped into the center of the ring at her quiet signal, and the mark on his wrist began to glow with a pale, steady light. The chamber held its breath. The drones froze for one sharp instant. Even the rumble from Victor's army seemed to fall away. Then the core answered fully, and a deep voice filled the chamber from nowhere and everywhere at once. It spoke one simple truth that made Veyra go still, made Ren tighten his grip, made Myra stare, and made Finn finally understand why he had been carried this far. The promise had never been made for one village alone. It had been made to guard the next keeper. And Veyra, listening to that ancient voice, realized the chamber was not only waking up. It was choosing who would stand with it when the next door opened. She lifted her hand a little higher, feeling the pull grow stronger, while Victor and Vance moved closer through the dark, and the first great choice of the awakened core hung directly in front of them, waiting to be made. The chamber below the border held its breath like a living thing, and the old stone walls glowed with thin, silver light. Dust drifted through the air in slow lines, and the floor trembled under the deep hum of the awakened core. Veyra stood at the center of that strange light, her black hair tied tight in a practical ponytail, her gray eyes fixed ahead, and her dark travel cloak hanging still around her slim, athletic frame. She was no longer just a young woman from the edge of the border. She was the one the chamber had chosen to test, and she knew why that choice mattered. If she failed, the border relay would fall silent, the mech army would roll across every road, and the villages beyond the hills would be left with nothing but fear and smoke. Captain Ren stood a few paces behind her, a broad man with brown hair, a weathered face, and a long scar across one cheek. His dark border guard coat was dusted with stone powder, and his strapped spear rested in his hand like a promise he intended to keep. Beside him, Myra, a young woman with red hair in a low braid and soft green eyes, gripped her healer satchel with both hands and watched the darkness with careful focus. Finn, the small black-haired boy with a village shirt and a cloth bundle held to his chest, stayed close to Myra because he understood only one thing clearly: if this place failed, home would not stay safe for long. All of them had come this far because the old system was not just a machine. It was a shield, a warning, and a lock. It guarded the border not for pride, but for the next keeper, and now that duty had passed into Veyra's hands. Then the voice inside the chamber spoke again, and it was not loud, but it was impossible to ignore. It told them that the promise had never belonged to one village alone. It had been made to protect every road, every farm, every gate, and every child who lived under the border sky. The machine core had been built long ago by people who feared a war that would never stop, so they sealed power inside stone and metal, and they placed a living oath around it. That oath could only stay true if the next keeper accepted both the burden and the warning. Victor wanted the core because he understood that same truth in a cruel way. He was a man with silver hair, an angular face, cold, pale eyes, and a long black imperial robe with hard shoulder armor. He did not seek the core to save anyone. He wanted it because whoever controlled the core could command the mech army, shut down the border relay halls, and force every settlement to kneel under imperial order. His motive was simple and terrible. He believed peace could only come through total control, and he was willing to break every promise in the land to build that peace in his own image. At his side, Vance moved like a blade in the dark, tall and lean, with pale hair, sharp features, and a black mech commander cloak covered in segmented armor plates. His dark command gauntlet flashed with faint power as he guided the advance. Vance believed Victor because he wanted rank, power, and the thrill of standing above everyone else. Together they were driving the Empire forward, and behind them, somewhere deeper in the tunnel network, the Iron Empire mech army was already beginning to answer the pull of the core. Veyra lowered her hand a little, then raised it again when the silver veins in the stone brightened around her palm. The chamber reacted at once, and a circle of light spread across the floor in a pattern that looked like a seal and a map at the same time. Captain Ren stepped beside her, his jaw set hard. He had spent his life defending borders, and he understood command better than most men. He also understood fear, because he had seen what happened when good people stayed silent too long. He told Veyra to speak if the chamber needed an answer, and he promised that if the test became a fight, he would hold the line. Myra moved to Finn and crouched beside him, her red braid falling over one shoulder as she checked the boy for cuts, panic, or shock. Finn was frightened, but he was also brave in the quiet way children often are, and he admitted that he had heard the voice too. He said it sounded old, like someone who had waited a very long time and still remembered every name. That small truth changed everything. Veyra realized the core was not only choosing a keeper from strength, it was choosing someone who could hear the people beneath the border, someone who would remember that power was meant to protect, not rule. Before she could answer the chamber, a metal crash echoed from the tunnel entrance, and Victor came into view with Vance half a step behind him. Their shadows stretched long over the broken stone, and with them came the first shape of the Empire Machine Force, a towering steel war machine with jointed metal limbs, glowing elemental cores, and heavy armor plates that flashed in the dim light. More machines crowded behind it, their power channels glowing with fire, ice, lightning, and void energy. The mech army had reached the relay hall, and the true battle was beginning. Victor did not shout like a common raider. He spoke with calm confidence because he believed the chamber already belonged to him. He said the old border system was weak, that the villages were small, and that a single ruler could keep order better than ancient lies and scattered hopes. He offered Veyra a place at his side, and that offer was the most dangerous weapon he had used so far. It was not just a threat. It was a trap built from praise. He told her that if she surrendered the core, he would spare the border and make her the first commander of a new age. Vance smiled at that, though his eyes stayed cold, because he knew Victor did not share power for long. Captain Wren stepped forward and rejected the offer at once. He raised his spear and said the border had survived storms, famine, and raids because people protected one another, not because one emperor gave permission. Veyra pulled Finn back behind a broken pillar and gathered a small field charm in her hands, ready to shield the boy if the room erupted. Veyra felt the chamber pull again, stronger now, and this time the light rose into a thin silver line between her hand and the stone ring at the chamber center. The voice inside the core returned, and it told her that the next keeper must choose a path. One path would command the machine core through force. The other would awaken its true seal, a seal that could bind the relay halls together and keep the Empire from taking them apart. But the seal would only open if she accepted a truth she had not yet spoken aloud. The old promise had not been made to protect a place. It had been made to protect a person, and that person was the next keeper. Veyra realized with a shock that the chamber had not been waiting for any one bloodline. It had been waiting for someone willing to carry the burden without greed. That was the twist hiding beneath all the old stone and ancient power. The core was not looking for the strongest fighter. It was looking for the one who would refuse to use power for herself. As the first mech machine stepped forward, Captain Wren drove his spear down and struck the floor, sending a sharp ring through the chamber that broke the machine line for a moment. Veyra released a burst of pale blue light that wrapped around Finn and the nearest fallen stones, turning them into cover. Finn, still shaking, found a loose control lever half buried in debris and shouted that there was an old maintenance panel near the wall. His small voice mattered because the chamber answered it with another flash of silver. Veyra moved fast, crossing the glowing floor as the chamber light followed her steps. She saw the panel Finn had noticed, hidden behind loose bricks and ancient wall markings. The border relay hall was old, but it was built with layers of purpose, and one of those layers was a way to draw power away from the core if danger came too close. Veyra pressed her palm to the panel, and the wall opened with a heavy stone grind. Inside waited rotating metal rings, glowing power lines, and a sealed channel leading toward the machine core below the hall. Victor finally lost patience. He ordered Vance to force the chamber open, and Vance lifted his command gauntlet with a flash of dark energy. The nearest mech machines surged ahead, but the chamber seal answered Veyra at the same time, surrounding her with silver light that pushed back the first wave. The clash shook the hall. Stone chips flew, metal screeched. The floor lights blazed bright and then dimmed again. Veyra felt fear, but she did not turn away. She remembered Finn, the villages, the border roads, and all the people who had never asked for this burden but would suffer if she failed. So she made her choice. She spoke to the chamber in a clear voice and accepted the role of keeper, not as ruler, but as guardian. The seal opened wider, and the chamber recognized her answer. A rush of power lifted through the room, and the mech line faltered as their control signal broke apart for the first time. Victor stared in cold disbelief as the ancient system rejected his claim. He had believed power could be taken by force, but the core did not care about pride or titles. It cared about trust, restraint, and duty. That truth enraged him because he had built his whole life on the idea that the world should obey him. Vance, seeing the fail and fearing the loss of rank, tried one last push and ordered the machines to press forward, but the hall had already changed. The relay seal locked onto the invading signal and began cutting it apart, one line at a time. Captain Wren used the opening to drive the front machine backward into a cracked pillar, and Veyra helped Finn climb over a low wall toward safety. Finn looked back once, and instead of a frightened child, he looked like someone who had just seen what courage really meant. Veyra held the light steady with both hands now, her cloak shifting in the rising wind from the core. She did not conquer Victor, she did something harder, she refused him. That refusal broke his certainty and exposed the weakness inside his plan. He needed the chamber to obey, and it would not. The mech army began to lose cohesion as the relay hall split the command stream, and the first machines were forced to retreat into the tunnel shadows. Still, Victor was not finished. He stepped back into the dark with Vance and promised that this was not the end because he had already learned where the next keeper stood. The chamber settled again, but it did not close. It stayed open, glowing with warning and hope at the same time. Veyra stood in the center of that light, changed by the choice she had made. She was no longer afraid of carrying the burden alone because she finally understood that the role of keeper was not about power. It was about standing between the world and those who wanted to break it. Behind her, Captain Wren, Myra, and Finn gathered close, and for the first time, the chamber seemed to accept them not as visitors, but as the first true circle around the new keeper. Far below, deeper in the machine core, something else began to wake, and the silver veins in the stone pulsed once more, as if the next door had just started to open. The underground hall stayed very still, but it no longer felt empty. The old stone walls, the worn pillars, and the cracked floor tiles seemed to listen to Veyra now, as if the border relay hall had finally chosen her as much as she had chosen it. The silver veins in the Eclipse stone glowed in slow pulses, and each pulse threw pale light across her black ponytail, her gray eyes, and the dark travel cloak hanging over her simple battle clothes. She stood very straight because she had just learned the hardest truth of all. The role of keeper was not about ruling, and it was not about being admired. It was about standing in the path of danger, even when fear told her to step aside. Captain Wren watched her with his weathered face and scar across one cheek, his brown hair damp with sweat from the climb below. He was a border guard through and through, a man who wanted order because he had seen what happened when order failed. Myra, with her red braid and soft green eyes, kept one hand near her healer satchel because she wanted to protect people and hated wasting even one life. Finn, small and quiet with his black hair and village clothes, held his cloth bundle tight because he wanted to stay safe and still believed grown people could fix everything. They mattered now because the chamber had accepted them as the first circle around the new keeper, and that meant they were no longer strangers in the dark. They were part of the wall between the world and whatever waited below. Then the floor answered with a deep metal groan. The sound came from far under their feet, from the machine core hidden beneath the hall, and it rolled through the chamber like a warning. The silver veins in the stone brightened, then dimmed, then brightened again, each pulse faster than before. Captain Wren stepped closer to Veyra and lowered his spear, ready for trouble, because he understood that quiet changes were usually the most dangerous ones. Myra looked up at the ceiling and whispered that the seal was loosening. She had studied old field notes from border ruins, and she knew that old power did not wake without a reason. Finn glanced from face to face, and his fear was plain, but so was his trust because he had seen Veyra stand when others wanted to run. Veyra touched the Eclipse stone, and a cold shiver moved through her arm. In that instant, she felt the shape of the machine below, not as a drawing or a rumor, but as a living thing with many rings, many lines, and one sealed heart. The core was waking because something inside it had noticed the new keeper. That meant the chamber was not simply reacting to their presence. It was testing her. Above them, deep in the upper tunnels, faint footsteps echoed once, then stopped. Someone else was near, and Veyra did not need anyone to say the name. Emperor Victor was moving his pieces, and Vance was likely at his side because they had never hidden their hunger. Victor wanted the power of the old system for the same reason he wanted every border city to bend. He believed fear was the best way to hold a realm together. Vance wanted more than loyalty. He wanted command, the kind that let him turn steel soldiers into a single fist. Together, they wanted the mech army, and if they reached the core first, they could force the borderlands into silence. The next chamber opened slowly when Veyra placed both hands on the Eclipse stone and spoke the simple vow that the keepers had carved into the wall panel. The old archway ahead shivered, the loose bricks fell inward, and a narrow passage lit up with silver lines along the floor. It was not a door made of wood or iron. It was a system door built from stone and force, and it had waited a long time for a keeper who would not misuse it. The group moved together through the passage, and their small formation felt strong in the dark. Wren went first, spear ready, eyes scanning every corner. Myra stayed just behind Veyra, ready to help if the keeper's strength failed. Finn stayed in the middle because everyone agreed that the boy should not be left exposed, and because he had a gift for noticing small things other people missed. The passage opened into a vast inner shaft where huge metal rings turned far below like a sleeping storm. Power lines glowed in fire orange, ice blue, and lightning white, then disappeared into a sealed core the size of a house. Veyra stared at it in silence because the scale of it was almost too much to hold in one mind. This was not just a machine. It was the command heart of the Iron Empire mech army. Every towering war machine above them, with its jointed limbs and glowing elemental cores, was tied to this place. If the core was seized, the army would no longer serve the border. It would serve the hand that held the key. And Victor was exactly the kind of ruler who would use that power without mercy. Veyra breathed out slowly and said the worst part. The old records had warned that the core would not wake only for a keeper. It would also wake if the Empire was close enough to corrupt its command. That was why the Keepers were created in the first place. They were never rulers, they were guardians against greedy hands. That truth struck Veyra harder than any blade could have. She had once thought the stone called her because she was strong. Now she understood that it had chosen her because she could still say no to power. That was her change, and it was already changing her face, her voice, and the way she stood. She was no longer trying to prove she deserved the role. She was trying to honor it. Before she could speak again, Finn suddenly pointed at a narrow glass panel set into the far wall. Behind the dusty glass, they could see a control gallery with broken railings and a row of dormant command seats. One seat had fresh marks on it. Someone had been there recently. Then a second surprise came, sharper and more unsettling. The marks were not from Victor. They were from someone who had knelt there, studied the panel, and then left a handprint in dark grease. Veyra moved closer and found a sign etched behind the panel, half hidden by grime. It was the symbol of an old keeper line, but not the one Veyra knew from the chamber above. This one was older, and below it were words in plain language. The core was split, and one half could guide while the other half could command. Ren frowned at once because that meant the Empire had not built one perfect weapon. It had built a system with a hidden divide. Veyra felt the twist settle into place. The Keepers had not only protected the core from rulers, they had also hidden part of its true purpose. The chamber above was the guidance side, but something deeper below was the command side. If Victor found it first, he could force the mech army to march. If Veyra claimed it without understanding it, she could break the balance and hurt the very people she wanted to protect. The burden suddenly grew much heavier because the answer was not simple power. It was knowledge, patience, and trust. The core then shuddered. A low voice, not human and not quite machine, spread through the metal rings. It asked for the name of the keeper, and the sound echoed through the shaft like thunder inside a bell. Veyra answered clearly because fear no longer ruled her mouth. She gave her name and her vow. The silver veins around her brightened into a full circle, and the machine responded by opening a second ring below the first. A stairway of narrow metal steps slid out from the shaft wall, leading down into deeper dark. At the same moment, a distant alarm bell rang somewhere above them in the old relay tunnels. Victor was close now. He had sensed the opening, or one of his scouts had reported it. Captain Ren raised his spear and told the others to stay tight. Veyra packed her satchel and checked the cloth wraps at her wrist because healing would matter as much as fighting if the next battle came fast. Finn stepped closer to Veyra, and for the first time his face showed less fear than hope. He had watched her become someone different right in front of him, and he believed her now. Veyra looked down the new stairway where the dark waited and the core hummed below, and she understood that the next door was not just a path. It was a test. Somewhere under the machine, something old had fully woken, and it was waiting to learn whether the new keeper would guard the balance or let the Empire tear it apart. Veyra tightened her gloves, took one slow breath, and led her small circle toward the deeper level, while the pulse of silver light beat behind them like a second heart. Outside the shaft, steel footsteps were already drawing near, and the clash for the future of the borderlands was about to begin. The underground hall grew colder as Veyra led the way, and the silver pulse from below painted the stone walls in sharp light. The border relay hall had once been a quiet place of old records and hidden doors, but now it felt like a living heart buried under the mountain. Broken pillars stood like tired guards, and loose bricks shifted with each distant shake from the engine above. Veyra, a young woman with black hair tied in a practical ponytail and gray eyes that missed nothing, kept her dark cloak close as she walked. She had taken the role of keeper only hours before, but the weight of it already sat on her shoulders like armor. Behind her came Captain Wren, a broad man with brown hair, a weathered face, and a long scar across one cheek, moving with the hard steps of a border guard who refused to bend. Veyra followed next, a young woman with red hair and a low braid and soft green eyes, carrying her healer satchel with careful hands because she knew one wrong fall could leave someone unable to keep going. Finn, a small boy with black hair and a simple village shirt, stayed close to Veyra and held his little cloth bundle against his chest as if it were the last safe thing in the world. They did not need to say the danger out loud. The steel footsteps above already did that. Emperor Victor wanted the core below because he believed anything old and powerful should belong to the Empire. Commander Vance wanted it because he wanted control, and control was the only thing he ever trusted. If they reached the chamber first, the borderlands would lose the last force that kept the Empire from crushing every village between the rivers and the hills. So Veyra kept moving, and everyone with her understood that the next door could decide the fate of all of them. The deeper passage opened into a wide chamber lined with ancient wall panels, and the glow of the silver veins grew stronger with every step. Strange marks covered the floor tiles, not carved as decoration, but placed like warnings. Veyra saw the same circular shape again and again, the same pattern that matched the Eclipse stone sitting far above in the hall. The stone marker was no ordinary relic. It was a seal, a guide, and a lock all at once, and the old machine had been built around its rules. That was the truth the awakened force was showing her now. It did not care about rank, flags, or armies. It cared only about balance, and it had chosen the bloodline of a keeper to prove who could protect it. Finn was the first to notice the narrow stone arch at the end of the chamber, because his small size let him slip forward when the others slowed. He stared at a panel hidden behind cracked plaster and said in a soft voice that there was a symbol matching the cloth tags in his bundle. Veyra stepped beside him, and her calm eyes widened when she saw that one of the tags was not just cloth, but a key strip taken from an old relay map. She had carried it from the village because a dying elder had forced it into her hands, saying it would matter when the silver light woke. Until now, she had not understood why. Veyra did understand, and that was the first twist in the path. The child had not been brought along by chance. His bundle held the missing proof that the hall had once served as a safe route for keepers and not as a war bunker. The Empire had erased that truth because Victor wanted the machine to look like a weapon. Veyra touched the wall panel and it slid aside with a deep stone grind. Behind it was a narrow stair that dropped toward the core. The air from below was hot and metallic, and the silver pulse came up in steady waves like a warning breathing through a sealed mouth. Veyra looked back once at her circle and then she went down, because the machine was clearly asking the keeper to come closer. Above them, the first clash began in the outer shaft. Captain Wren reached the stair landing just as Imperial mech scouts pushed through the smoke, their heavy frames shining with fire and lightning cores. Wren planted his spear and drove the first machine back with a brutal shove that cracked its shoulder plating and forced it to retreat into the others. His voice stayed calm, but his eyes were sharp because he knew his task was not to win forever. It was to buy time. The Iron Empire mech army was huge, and its steel ranks could replace each fallen machine with another. Still, Wren used the hall itself as a shield. He knocked loose support beams, slammed shut iron gates, and forced the front line into narrow paths where their power could not spread wide. Veyra moved among the wounded with fast, steady hands, wrapping arms, calming shaking breaths, and giving water to men who thought they had already reached the end of their strength. She was not a fighter by nature, but her courage mattered because a guard could not hold a wall if fear emptied the line behind him. Even Finn helped, carrying cloth and water, his small frame darting between broken stones while he kept asking whether Veyra would come back. Nobody lied to him, they only told him to trust the silver light. That light was growing stronger below, and the deeper chamber was opening its secret. Victor and Vance had reached the upper hall now, and their voices carried through the stone. Victor spoke with cold certainty, saying the machine belonged to the Empire because the Empire had the right to decide the future. Vance spoke less, but his words were sharper, and he said the keepers had hidden the truth for too long. He believed the world needed one hand on the wheel, and he had no doubt that his hand should be the one. Their motive was simple and dangerous. They feared the borderlands because a free border could resist them, and they wanted the core to remove that resistance forever. Veyra heard their voices through the walls, and she felt the old anger rise in her chest, but now it was no longer only anger. It was purpose. She was no longer a frightened girl carrying a dangerous burden. She was the person the chamber had been waiting to judge. At the bottom of the stair, the group stepped into the machine heart, and the sight stole even Ren's silence when he arrived a moment later through a side route. Rotating metal rings turned slowly around a sealed central engine, while glowing power lines spread across the floor like veins of light. The machine core was not sleeping, and it was not broken. It was thinking. Its silver pulse answered Veyra the moment she entered, and the sound was like a deep voice speaking through metal. Then the full truth emerged, not in words alone, but in images projected across the chamber walls. Long ago, the first border keepers and the engineers of the old empire had built this system together to stop endless war. The Eclipse stone had not been made as a prison, but as a balance mark. It let the core share power across the borderlands so no ruler could gather too much of it in one place. Victor had learned only part of that truth, and he had chosen the worst part for his own use. He believed the machine could be bent into a single imperial engine, but the core rejected any hand that tried to force it. That was why the chamber had awakened now. It was not choosing the strongest person. It was choosing the most willing person. The voice of the machine spoke at last through the silver light, and only Veyra could hear it clearly. It asked whether she would bind the core to empire greed or keep it open for all who lived under its protection. That was when the second twist struck like a blade of light. Finn stepped forward and placed his small cloth bundle on the floor, and the hidden strip inside locked into a ring slot on the chamber dais. The machine recognized the village tag because Finn was descended from the last relay family, the people who carried messages and keys between the old keepers. He had not known it, and neither had anyone else, but his blood and the elder no one had trusted had brought the missing piece into the hall. The chamber brightened, and the sealed core began to open. Veyra looked at Finn, then at the machine, then at the climbing stairs where Victor and Vance were almost through. In that single breath, she understood that the real test was not to seize power. It was to share it without fear. So she stepped into the light, raised her gloved hands, and spoke her answer to the old machine. She would guard the balance, and she would not let the Empire turn the borderlands into a cage. The silver veins flared, the rings turned faster, and the chamber doors began to rise as the enemy voices came closer, bringing the next clash to the edge of the core. The underground hall shook under a deep and steady hum, while the old stone walls glowed with thin silver lines that looked almost alive. Veyra stood at the center of that light, with her black hair tied tight in a practical ponytail, her gray eyes fixed on the rising chamber doors. She wore her dark travel cloak, simple battle clothing, leather gloves, and worn boots, and she looked small against the giant machine around her, yet she did not step back. Captain Ren stood near the broken archway behind her, broad shoulders tense beneath his dark border guard coat, his brown hair damp with sweat, his weathered face hard with worry, and the long scar across his cheek catching the lantern light. Myra stood beside him, her red hair pulled into a low braid, her soft green eyes sharp with concern, her layered healer clothes wrapped close around her slim frame, and her satchel ready at her side. Finn, the small black-haired boy, clutched his cloth bundle to his chest and stared at the glowing floor in fear, because he knew that if the Empire took this core, every safe road in the borderlands would become a trap. That was the central danger now, and everyone in the hall understood it. Emperor Victor wanted the machine because he believed fear made people easier to rule, while Commander Vance wanted the war system because he believed order mattered more than freedom. Together, they planned to turn the borderlands into a locked cage, with the Iron Empire mech army guarding every road, every tower, and every village. The Eclipse stone had answered Veyra because it was ancient and selective, and because it could only work when its power was shared with balance, not taken by force. If Veyra failed here, the Empire would claim the core, the border would collapse into silence, and no one in the hall would be able to protect the people waiting above ground. The chamber doors rose higher, and the first sound that rushed in was the clank of heavy metal feet against stone. Through the widening opening, the Iron Empire mech army appeared in layers of steel and fire, with towering war machines moving like a single cold body. Their jointed limbs flashed with power, and their chest cores glowed in different colors, with fire in one row, ice in the next, lightning in another, and a darker void light deeper in the line. Captain Ren lifted his spear with both hands and moved in front of Myra and Finn, because his first duty was to hold the line long enough for the others to think. He was not a man who wanted glory, only a border that stayed open for the people who lived between empires, and that was why he had trusted Veyra from the first day. Myra swallowed hard, then moved toward the side wall, where she could heal anyone who fell and guide the frightened child to safety if the fight turned ugly. Finn watched the machines and then looked up at Veyra, because the girl who had once seemed like a stranger now stood between him and a future without freedom. Veyra kept both hands raised, and the silver veins in the floor responded to her touch, spreading light toward the machine rings in the center of the chamber. She did not try to seize the core because she had already learned the lesson that power taken in fear always shrank the world. Instead, she spoke to the old machine with a clear voice and said she would guard the balance and share the burden, so the borderlands would never become a prison. The rings obeyed, turning faster as if they were waking from a long sleep, and the glow climbed up her gloves like pale fire. Then a deeper voice rolled through the hall, cold and smooth, and Emperor Victor stepped into view above the stairs at the far side. He wore his long black imperial robe with hard shoulder armor and a high collar, and his silver hair shone like polished metal under the lantern light. His pale eyes fixed on Veyra with calm anger, and he said that her choice was foolish because people could not be trusted with freedom. He believed that if he controlled the core, the borderlands would remain quiet forever, and he would not have to fear revolt, dissent, or any power he could not command. Behind him, Commander Vance followed with a tall, lean frame, pale hair, sharp features, a black mech commander cloak, segmented armor plates, and a dark command gauntlet that flashed with coded light. Vance did not speak like a madman because he was not one. He spoke like a soldier who had decided that control was kindness, and he believed the Empire could save lives if it removed choice from the weak. That made him more dangerous than anger, because he truly thought his cruelty was useful. The first clash came hard and fast. Ren drove his spear into the floor and sent a sharp shock of force through the stone, breaking the front line of smaller machines and forcing their ranks to split. Myra moved behind him, her hands already glowing with pale blue healing light, and she pulled the pain out of his shoulders each time the pressure of the fight hit too hard. Finn ducked behind a pillar and held his breath, but he did not run, because he wanted to be brave in the same way he had seen Veyra be brave. Veyra kept her focus on the Eclipse stone, which now stood like a cracked dark ring in the middle of the chamber, its silver veins shining brighter every second. She realized that the stone was not just a key and not just a weapon. It was a judge. It reacted to fear, greed, and trust, and it could sense when a person wanted to rule alone. That was the hidden rule the Empire had never understood, and that was why Victor had never fully controlled it. He had spent years studying the machine, building war systems around it, and using his mech army to force answers from the borderlands, but the stone only opened fully for someone willing to share its power. That truth struck Veyra with the force of a new blade, because she saw why the border relay halls had been hidden, why old maps had been burned, and why Victor had hunted anyone who learned the truth. He had not only wanted the core for war, he had wanted it because it proved that his entire rule was built on fear, and that someone with a calmer heart could undo it. Vance noticed the change in her face and understood the danger at once. He ordered a heavy mech forward, one with bright lightning channels and thick armor, and it slammed into the floor near the core with enough force to shake loose dust from the ceiling. Ren rushed to meet it, but the mech pushed him back with a bright blast that forced him to slide across the stone. Myra cried out and moved toward him, but Veyra raised one hand and sent a wave of silver light through the chamber rings, causing the mech to freeze for 1 second, just long enough for Ren to rise again. The fight grew tighter, more desperate, and every move now mattered. Then the twist came, and it changed the meaning of everything in the chamber. Veyra felt the core answer not only to her, but to the lines of power that connected every border relay hall to the old underground system. The Empire had not simply discovered the machine and weaponized it. Victor had been feeding it stolen energy from villages, roads, and watch stations for years, slowly draining the borderlands so the center of the Empire could grow stronger. The machine core had been weakened by that theft, which was why the relays had become unstable and why the people near the border had suffered so much. The system was designed to balance many places at once, but Victor had twisted it into a one-way chain that pulled strength inward. Veyra saw the truth in a flood of silver light, and her anger rose, but it rose with purpose instead of panic. She looked at Ren, Myra, and Finn, and she understood that she could not fight alone. So she called to them all, asking them to anchor the core by sharing their own strength in different ways. Ren planted his spear and gave the chamber a steady point to hold against the machines. Myra spread her healing light through the floor cracks, easing the strain in the failing power lines and keeping the system from breaking apart. Finn, frightened but determined, opened his small cloth bundle and revealed a simple token from his village, a carved piece of wood that had once marked a safe path home. He placed it near the glowing ring because he wanted the machine to remember people, not just Empire. That small act mattered more than anyone expected. The stone answered the child first, and the chamber shivered with a warm pulse that cut through the cold control of Victor. For one breath, the entire core shifted. Victor stepped forward in shock, his pale eyes narrowing, and Vance looked at the growing light with real fear. He finally understood that the old machine had chosen a different future, and that his perfect order was breaking apart in front of him. Victor refused to accept it, and his voice turned hard as iron. He ordered every mech to advance at once, and the chamber filled with the sound of metal limbs, grinding gears, and charging cores. The Iron Empire mech army surged toward the center in a single wave, trying to crush the rising light before it could spread beyond the hall. Ren met the first impact with a loud shout and drove his spear through the gap between two machines, forcing one to buckle and the other to stagger back. Veyra shouted for him to hold steady, and she poured her healing light into his arm when the strain made it shake. Veyra felt the machine rings rising faster now, and she knew the choice had moved past fear and into action. She stepped closer to the Eclipse stone, raised both gloved hands again, and spoke with the calm of someone who had finally stopped asking whether she was worthy. She was not there to rule the core, she was there to open it. The silver veins spread from her fingertips into the wall panels, across the floor, and through the old arches of the border relay hall. Hidden mechanisms woke in the stone above and below, and a deep chain of locks began to release across the border system. Vance saw what was happening and lunged toward the control gauntlet at his wrist, but the core flashed and threw his command signal into chaos. His own machines faltered, confused by the new balance they could not force into shape. Victor shouted for him to regain control, but control was already slipping away. The chamber doors behind them opened wider, showing more of the dark tunnel beyond, and the sound of distant footsteps meant that reinforcements were coming. Yet the light inside the core had changed now, and Veyra understood that the fight was no longer only about surviving one chamber. It was about sending a new signal through every hidden relay, every border station, and every frightened village beyond the hill. She held the glow steady even as the floor trembled, and Ren stood beside her without question. Veyra stayed near Finn and kept both of them safe as the light grew brighter. Victor and Vance were not defeated yet, but they had lost the one thing they valued most. They no longer controlled the story. And as the old machine began to open deeper paths inside the Empire system, Veyra took one careful breath and prepared for the next move, knowing the true battle had only just begun. The old hall below the border stayed cold and still, while the new light from the machine moved across cracked stone and broken metal. Dust drifted through the air like gray snow, and the deep hum from the opening passage made every wall feel awake. Veyra stood near the Eclipse stone, her black hair tied back tight, her gray eyes fixed ahead, and her dark cloak hanging close around her slim, ready body. She was not calm, but she was steady, because she knew the worst part of the journey had only just begun. Captain Ren stood beside her with his broad shoulders squared, his brown hair damp with sweat, his scarred face hard with focus, and his spear held low but ready. Veyra stayed a few steps behind them, her red hair tied in a low braid, her green eyes careful and kind, while Finn, the small black-haired boy, kept both hands wrapped around his cloth bundle and watched the light with wide fear. They all understood the danger now. If Victor and Vance reached the machine core first, they could use the Empire war system to tighten their grip on every border town, crush every patrol, and turn fear into law. Veyra had no plan for victory yet, but she knew exactly what failure would mean, and that truth kept her moving. A deep metal shift rolled through the floor, and the hidden wall beside the Eclipse stone opened farther, revealing a narrow stairway lined with old power channels. The silver veins in the stone marker pulsed once, then again, as if the ancient system was checking who had earned the right to enter. Ren glanced at Veyra and she gave him a short nod because they had learned to trust each other without wasting words. He moved first, not because he wanted command, but because he had spent years guarding the border and knew how quickly a safe path could turn into an ambush. Veyra followed close behind Finn, one hand near his shoulder, ready to pull him back if the hall shifted again. She was a healer, but she was also brave in a quiet way, and she cared most about keeping people alive long enough to see tomorrow. Finn looked small in the giant hall, yet he mattered more than he knew, because the machine had reacted to him before, and because the Empire had already shown that it wanted him for reasons it had not explained. As they moved down the stairway, the walls opened into a long chamber filled with inactive mech frames, each one towering above them with heavy armor, jointed limbs, and dark power channels cut along the chest. The machines stood like sleeping guards, and the sight of them made Veyra understand the true scale of Victor and Vance's planned rule. This was not only a weapon, it was a system built to scare whole cities into obedience. Then the first trap woke up. A line of pale light ran across the floor, and a ring of metal plates rose from the stone with a sharp, grinding sound. The chamber answered the motion of their steps, and a low voice came from the wall panels, old and distorted, warning of unauthorized entry. Veyra froze for one breath, then reached toward the glow she still held from the Eclipse stone. The light in her palm was not huge, but it was clear and steady, and when she lifted it, the glowing plates slowed just enough for the others to move. Ren stepped in front of her without hesitation, using the shaft of his spear to push a loose plate aside and make a safe lane. He was not a man of fancy ideas, but he knew how to protect people in dangerous places, and that made him matter just as much as any hero with a grand speech. Veyra pulled Finn close as another section of floor clicked open and revealed a drop into darkness below. Finn made a small sound of fear, but Veyra kept her voice calm and told him to breathe slowly and stay near her boots. The boy nodded because he trusted her more each time she spoke. Behind them, Veyra heard a new sound, the slow, cold march of metal feet somewhere deeper in the system. Victor and Vance had not reached this hall yet, but their command was still alive in the machine, and it was waking everything that listened to them. That was when Veyra understood the next danger. The machine did not only defend the Empire. It also remembered the Empire, and memory could be used like a weapon. The chamber opened into a wider control room, and there they found the first real surprise. The wall panels peeled back to reveal an old map of the border network, but it was not showing the land above. It was showing a hidden route under the Empire itself, one that led straight toward the machine core and then split into 3 sealed paths. One path was marked with the sign of power. One path was marked with the sign of control. The last path had no mark at all, only a broken circle and a warning line beneath it. Veyra studied the map and her face tightened because she realized this was not just a road map. It was a choice the Empire had hidden from everyone. The machine core could be reached in more than one way, and each path served a different purpose. That meant Victor and Vance had not built this system from the outside. They had learned from it, and perhaps they had also hidden parts of it from each other. Ren saw the broken circle and asked the one question everyone else was afraid to ask: who made the third path? The answer came from a voice behind them, calm and cold, and it made the whole room seem smaller at once. Vance stepped out from a side passage with 2 armored guards and a black command gauntlet raised at his side. His pale hair was neat, his sharp features gave him a hard look, and his tall body moved like a man who believed every room should bend for him. He smiled at the map more than at the people because he wanted the machine core for order, not for wonder. He said the third path belonged to the first builders, the ones who learned that a machine built for fear could always be broken by trust. He said that was why the Empire had erased it. Veyra realized then that Vance was not simply trying to win a battle. He was trying to prove that control was stronger than mercy, and that made him more dangerous than any open attack. The clash that followed was fast, sharp, and loud enough to shake dust from the ceiling. Vance sent 2 command pulses through his gauntlet, and the nearby mech frames jerked to life with glowing cores and grinding joints. Ren moved at once, planting his boots and driving his spear into the first machine's leg joint, just enough to send it staggering into the wall. Veyra dragged Finn behind a broken console, then raised her hands and sent a soft healing glow over a deep cut on Ren's arm from flying metal. Veyra kept the Eclipse stone light in front of her, and the hidden path on the map responded, opening a narrow door in the floor that no one had noticed before. The door was a trap for the Empire and a gift for anyone who could read the truth. Vance saw it too late, and for the first time his calm look broke. He had expected the old machine to obey him, but the hidden path answered Veyra instead. That was the twist buried in the chamber. The machine core had not been built to obey the loudest ruler. It had been built to answer the one who could keep the system from turning on itself. Veyra did not understand every rule yet, but she understood enough to act. She shouted for the others to move, and they slipped through the opening just as the mech frames crashed together behind them. Vance was not destroyed, but he was driven back, forced to lose his clean approach and his sense of control. He shouted after them, promising that Victor would finish the hunt. but his voice was swallowed by the metal roar of the closing passage. The narrow route below felt older than the rest of the empire, and the air changed there, becoming still and heavy, as if the walls were holding their breath. The path curved around giant rotating rings of metal, each one filled with faint light, and every turn brought them closer to the machine core. Veyra walked at the front now because the hidden path had answered her, and because the others had begun to trust her choice without asking for proof. That trust changed her more than the light did. She had started this journey as someone who only wanted to survive long enough to protect a few people. Now she was becoming someone who could lead them through fear without losing herself. Ren noticed the change first. He said nothing, but his eyes stayed on her with quiet approval, like a guard who had finally seen the leader inside the traveler. Myra noticed it too, and she smiled faintly while keeping Finn close. Even Finn noticed, because children see change before adults admit it. He asked Veyra if the machine would listen to her forever now, and she told him the honest answer. No, it would only listen as long as she kept choosing the right path. That answer mattered because it showed Finn that power was not the same as greed. Power could also be responsibility. Then the passage ended at a large sealed gate where the glow from the Eclipse stones spread across a ring of writing carved into the metal. The writing named the next chamber and confirmed the one truth Victor and Vance had feared. The machine core was not just a heart for the war system. It was also a lock on something deeper, something the Empire had hidden for a long time, and something that could change every border city if it was opened the wrong way. Before Veyra could speak, the whole gate shuddered from the other side, as if someone very strong had just reached the same door. Victor was close now, and that meant the next choice would matter more than any before it. Veyra tightened her glove around the glow, took one slow breath, and stepped toward the sealed gate, knowing the battle had only become more serious, and knowing that the next part of the journey would force them all to choose what they truly believed in. Behind her, Ren lifted his spear, Myra steadied Finn, and the hidden machine hummed like a living thing preparing to wake. The old empire still had many secrets, and Victor still had many ways to strike, but for the first time since the hill, Veyra was not following fear. She was leading through it, and somewhere ahead, behind the sealed gate, the next truth waited in the dark, ready to test whether trust could survive the heart of the empire itself. The underground hall stayed cold and still, while dim lantern light shivered across cracked stone and old metal walls. Veyra stood at the front with her black hair tied back, her gray eyes fixed on the sealed gate ahead. Captain Ren, a broad man with brown hair and a scarred face, held his spear low because he knew the trap could wake at any moment. Myra, a young woman with red hair and soft green eyes, kept one hand on Finn, the small black-haired boy who clutched his bundle and tried not to shake. They had reached the heart of the Empire, and if they failed here, Victor would use the hidden machine core to tighten his grip on every border town. The broken control map on the wall had shown them a second path, but that path led through the sleeping mech frame and into the sealed gate chamber. Veyra understood the danger now because Victor did not want only power. He wanted obedience, since the Empire had spent years feeding every machine from one core, and if he owned that core, he could command fear everywhere at once. Then Vance stepped out behind two masked guards, his pale hair bright under the lanterns, and his sharp smile made the room feel colder. He wanted the core for himself, and he had brought the guards to force the choice. Before Veyra could speak, the Eclipse stone in the floor ring began to hum. Thin silver veins lit the dark surface, and the sealed gate answered with a deep metal sound. The truth came fast and clear. The gate was not a prison for treasure. It was a lock placed by the first builders to keep the machine core from obeying any single ruler. Victor had tried to open it because he feared chaos, and Vance had tried to break it because he feared losing control. Both men wanted the same power for different reasons, and both were ready to hurt the world to get it. Veyra took one slow breath, then stepped onto the circle and told everyone to choose. Ren lifted his spear and stood beside her. Myra protected Finn and trusted Veyra instead of fear. Even the sleeping mech frame began to stir, but not as a weapon. It awakened as a shield because the core accepted a united hand, not a greedy one. Victor struck from the shadows, but the machine rejected his command. Vance shouted and lunged forward, yet his own guards froze when they saw the truth. The hidden system collapsed around their lies, and the sealed gate opened at last. Inside, there was no throne, only a quiet core chamber and records of the old empire. Veyra read them and learned the final truth: the border people had never been meant to serve the empire. They were meant to keep it honest. That changed her completely. She was no longer a girl running from fear. She was a leader who could carry truth, protect her people, and build a future where trust mattered more than control. As dawn light reached the hall, Veyra led her friends back into the world, and the Empire began to change with them.